Okay, we will continue 1957 at a glance, and we're moving on to September 2nd. With baseball season upon us, this is kind of significant. On September 2nd of 1957, Milwaukee Braves baseball player Frank Torre scored a major league record 6 runs in one game. That would be difficult to do. You'd have to get on base, first of all, 6 times in a game to make that happen. Wouldn't that be tough, Pete? You're a baseball guy. So he set a major league record which still stands today, scored 6 runs in one game. That'd be very difficult. A lot of times you only get up 4 times in a game. And then you'd have to get on all 4 times. Well, this guy happened to get up 6 times and got on base all 6 times and scored. That's a pretty amazing feat in baseball. Okay, you might take out your sheets too that I gave you. I gave you another one today. On October 7th, American Bandstand premiered for the first time on network television on ABC. And it was hosted by Dick Clark. Now I get older, and the trouble with this job is I get a year older and you kids all stay the same age. And so history goes on. But the best chance I would think that you ever might have seen Dick Clark was on New Year's Eve. He always hosted Rockin' New Year's Eve, you know, where they keep you up all night till it's New Year's Eve and all that. And he hosted that clear into the last few years. But American Bandstand was a big deal. I mean, they would bring these young teenagers in and they would play music and sing songs. And a lot of top artists got their start by playing on American Bandstand. It ran forever, from 1957 till into the 80s. I mean, it was a very popular Saturday morning thing, was American Bandstand. Okay, November. Some of you had questions on this. On November 3rd of 1957 is when the Soviet Union launched its second space satellite. And what did it carry? A dog named Laika. Okay, the Soviet Union launched its second space satellite. We talked about that. This one carried a dog named Laika. Now I'll tell you a little bit about old Laika. It's interesting how she got aboard that spacecraft. She actually was a female stray dog from the streets of Moscow. They just picked her off the street, a stray dog. And unfortunately, she died within hours from overheating in the capsule. So she did not live long. Kind of a sacrificial dog. So she was a female stray dog from the streets of Moscow who died within hours from overheating. Now, the Russians lied to their people until 2002, stating that the dog died when the oxygen ran out on day 6 of the flight. So really, she burned up, so to speak, died of overheating within hours. But the fact was not made public until 2002. Instead, the Soviet Union reported to their people that Laika died when her oxygen ran out on the 6th day of the flight. They didn't want to, you know, that non-success to be public so early. Well, finally, on April 11th, 2008, April 11th, 2008, Russian officials unveiled a monument to Laika. And they built that monument near the military research facility in Moscow that prepared her flight into space. So on April 11th, 2008, Russian officials unveiled a monument to Laika. They built that near the military research facility in Moscow that actually prepared her for flight. And the monument features a dog standing on top of a rocket. Hey, way to go. A dog standing on top of a rocket. Now, if you go on eBay, I just, for the heck of it, because I have no life, went on eBay and put in Laika, you ought to see all the stuff they sell on that. You wouldn't think that'd be a big deal. Just tons of stuff that you can still buy on eBay that relates to Laika, the dog that went up on November 7th, 1957. And then we'll go to December. Guess what was introduced to readers on December 1st, 1957? Dr. Seuss and the Cat in the Hat. What was Dr. Seuss's real name? Anybody know? Theodore Geisel, that's right. Theodore Geisel, also known as Dr. Seuss, introduced to his readers on December 1st, 1957, The Cat in the Hat. Now make sure you have your new handouts I gave you for this next subtopic of memorable moments in 1958-59. Okay, memorable moments in 1958-59. I'm going to give you 6 memorable, very significant events that occurred during the Eisenhower administration in the years 1958 and 59. So get your hand out in front of you if you would, please. Number 1 occurred on March 24th, 1958. And by looking at your handout, Mr. Rasmussen, what do you think happened on March 24th, 1958? Here's your handout.
Oh, that
Here
handout.
you go. What happened? What do you think?
Right here, something with Elvis.
Right, Elvis Presley traded his rock and roll crown for a set of army fatigues. Elvis Presley on March 24th, 1958, Elvis Presley traded his rock and roll crown for a set of army fatigues. That was a big deal. He was very, very popular at the time. Fatigues is like army clothing. F-A-T-I-G-U-E-S. Fatigues. Army fatigues are army uniforms. Hunter. The second date is June 26, 1958. By looking at your handout, what might you think have happened on that day?
Cute little kid right there.
Yeah, a young man by the name of Randall Curtis Armstrong. Randall Curtis Armstrong was born in Red Lodge, Montana.
Oh my.
He was adopted at the age of 2 and later went on to become a very famous AP United States history teacher at Orland High School. Yeah. And there he is. Not going to get any more than that out of it? Yes. It's on your ID sheet, is it not? I'll repeat that. On June 26, 1958, Randall Curtis Armstrong was born at Red Lodge, Montana. He was adopted at the age of 2 and later went on to become a very famous AP US history teacher at Orland High
You were
School.
adopted?
Well, his last name's
Tell me that isn't the most adorable little guy you've ever seen. Come on, really? That's the best reaction I get. All right, since that bored you so bad, we'll move on. January 3rd, 1959. On January 3rd, 1959, Alaska became the nation's 49th and largest state. January 3rd, 1959, Alaska becomes the nation's 49th and largest state. No comparison to June 26, 1958, but you know, you got to know these things. Alrighty, number 4, February 3rd, 1959. Again, back to your sheet. On February 3rd, 1959, musicians Buddy Holly, J.P. Richardson, and Ritchie Valens were killed in a plane crash near Mason City, Iowa. February 3rd, 1959, musicians Buddy Holly, J.P. Richardson, and Ritchie Valens were killed in a plane crash near Mason City, Iowa. You can see Ritchie Valens, and they came out with the movie. Have you ever seen the movie La Bamba?
I have.
Very good, yeah, and it's about Ritchie Valens. If you're bored on a Saturday night and want to learn more about this young man, the bad thing about this deal was they were flying in a plane and the weather was bad. There were actually 4 of them that needed to fly. And what happened, Kellyanna, do you remember?
Well,
Why didn't all 4 of them fly? Because they didn't have room, right?
Right. and
So
then
what happened?
One of them was supposed to be on the bus. and then
One
they-
had to ride the bus, but how'd they
flipped a
determine
coin.
that?
They flipped a coin.
They did. They flipped a coin to see who the unfortunate soul was that had to ride the bus instead of fly. Well, it turned out that the guy that lost the coin flip was the only one that didn't lose his life. So it was a very unfortunate situation. A great music talent that a lot of people have never heard of was Ritchie Valens. We've probably heard of Buddy Holly. Somebody do a report on J.P. Richardson? Anybody know? Very famous musicians ever died, but Richie Valens was kind of the forget one there, and I think that was the purpose of the movie that came out probably 10 years ago or so, La Bamba. If you get bored, it's a very good movie. He grew up in a very tough life and turned out to have a lot of problems, but persevered. Okay, fifth event, May 28th, 1959. Two monkeys were picked up alive from the Atlantic Ocean. Two monkeys were picked up alive from the Atlantic Ocean. Does anybody know what they were doing in the Atlantic Ocean?
They come down from space.
Yeah, they just completed a 1,700-mile space trip that took them to the height of 360 miles above the Earth's surface in a Jupiter rocket. So on May 28, 1959, two monkeys were picked up alive from the Atlantic Ocean after a 1,700-mile space trip that took them to a height of 360 miles in the nose of a Jupiter rocket. Two different monkeys. They had names. Anybody know any of their names? Anybody know the names of the two monkeys or whatever? One was Abel, just like it sounds, A-B-L-E. He was a 7-pound rhesus monkey. R-H-E-S-U-S. Abel, a 7-pound rhesus monkey, R-H-E-S-U-S. And Baker, B-A-K-E-R, he was a 1-pound squirrel monkey. 1-pound squirrel monkey. So Abel, a 7-pound rhesus monkey, and Baker, a 1-pound squirrel monkey, were picked up alive from the Atlantic Ocean after a 1,700-mile space trip. Now, it's kind of interesting in this because Abel, the bigger of the two monkeys, was trained to tap a telegraph key when a red light flashed. So when that monkey was in space, when a red light flashed, he would tap the telegraph key. Now, the reason they did that, they reached a maximum speed of 10,000 miles per hour, and they wanted to see if that would affect that monkey's ability to, pick up the red light and hit the key. And it did not. He was able to perform the task. So again, Abel was trained to tap a telegraph key when a red light flashed, and they did that to see whether acceleration to a maximum speed of 10,000 miles per hour would affect basic task performance while in space, to see if that would make a difference in the reaction. Now, this was kind of interesting because we felt we got a one-up on the Russians because they sent one dog who died, and we sent two monkeys that lived. So that was a big deal. So the monkeys' flight was a prelude to the first manned U.S. space flight, and it gave us a one-up on the Russians whose one animal died in space. So we kind of were catching up a little bit in the space race. And finally, on August 21st of 1959, what do you think happened in reference to the third thing we talked about? What happened on August 21st, 1959, kind of in reference to the third thing we talked about?
Hawaii.
Hawaii, very good, my dear. Hawaii becomes the nation's 50th state on August 21st, 1959. Okay, that clears up our at-a-glances. If you noticed on your ID sheet, I took 1953 off, so you will not be responsible to know anything for 1953 on the exam. Now, that's going to take us to a pretty important subtopic, which is U-2 overflights and the capture of Francis Gary Powers. Okay, U-2 overflights and the capture of Francis Gary Powers. Now remember, we're kind of in the Cold War here, the scare of communism in the United States, and we're wanting to keep an eye on those damn Russians to see what they're doing. Anybody know what a U-2 flight is? A U-2 is? What's that? What's that? It's crappy band, no. It's good. Well, their U-2 flights are spy flights. They're surveillance flights. Okay, they're unarmed. They're doing surveillance, taking pictures. Well, on May 1st of 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down while flying through Soviet airspace. On May 1st, 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down while flying through Soviet airspace. And the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was captured alive by the Soviet Union. The pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was captured alive by the Soviets. Now the key to this whole thing is the Soviet Union now has concrete proof of what? That the United States have been conducting spy flights over their country. But the thing is, they don't leak out that they have powers. So the United States assumes what? That he's dead, that he went down with the flight. Okay? So kind of keep that in mind as we talk about this. The capture of Gary Powers was not given right away, or that information was not given, and the United States thought he was dead. Okay? Now, of course, the Russians confront the United States about this spy plane. The United States says, oh no. That plane was simply conducting a routine weather flight. You know, we have those flights out there to check out the weather. Now, what would be your first question if you were the Soviets if they told you that? What's that? Why are you checking out our weather, right? What do you, I mean, come on. Well, they said, well, what happened is the plane experienced a malfunction of its oxygen delivery system, and this malfunction caused the pilot to black out, and that's how he drifted over your airspace. That's what they told him, because they think Powers is dead. Okay? So when the Russians confront the United States and ask him, as Taylor said, what are you doing checking the weather over our country? They say, oh, we weren't over your country on purpose. What happened was we had a malfunction of our oxygen system in that particular plane, and the pilot blacked out, and that's how we drifted over Soviet airspace. Well, finally, on May 7th, 6 days later, what does the United States learn? That Gary Powers is alive. Okay? They learn he's alive. And he's in Soviet custody. Well, as you can imagine, the Soviets didn't buy the story that Powers had blacked out as claimed by American government officials. So as a result, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev forces Eisenhower's hand. So the Soviets didn't buy the story that Powers had blacked out. Why didn't they buy that story? They had him. They had talked to him. Okay? So, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev is going to force President Eisenhower's hand. And we introduce you to Soviet Premier Khrushchev for the first time, and we will be visiting about him for many weeks to come in our lectures. So as a result, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev forces Eisenhower's hands. Well, finally, on May 11th, 1960, President Eisenhower comes clean. He acknowledges that he was fully aware of the entire spy program and of Powers' flight in particular. So he fesses up on May 11th, 1960, stating publicly that, yes, I am aware of our spy program, our U-2 flights, and I was aware of Powers' flight in particular. And what does Premier Khrushchev demand now that he fesses up? A simple apology. Okay? So Khrushchev demands that President Eisenhower apologize for the flight, and also he demands that he promise the Soviet Union that they will discontinue such flights. So Premier Khrushchev, after hearing the news that Eisenhower is fully aware of these spy missions, including the one Gary Powers was in, he demands that President Eisenhower apologize for the flight, and he promised to discontinue it. Well, Eisenhower wouldn't do it. Matter of fact, he stated these two things publicly. He wouldn't apologize. He stated these two things publicly. He told Khrushchev, in essence, that these American spy flights were a necessity. They were a necessary element in maintaining national defense. In other words, he basically stated, these are necessary that we do these if we're going to maintain our national defense against communism. So he publicly stated that the American spy flights were a necessity and they were necessary in maintaining national defense. In other words, he had no intention to do what? Stop them. Matter of fact, the second thing he said as President of the United States, he planned to authorize and continue those flights because they were so necessary to national defense. So here comes a bad relationship between who? Nikita Khrushchev and Russia and President Eisenhower in the United States. This is the beginning of a bad relationship. So Eisenhower will not apologize for the flight, and he will not discontinue the flights. He does just the opposite. He explains that they are necessary in maintaining national defense, and he plans to authorize and continue those flights. Well, like I mentioned, the relations between the United States and Communist Russia cooled dramatically over this, and it got so bad that the United States and the Soviets were in a peace convention. It was called the Paris Peace Summit in Geneva, and because of Eisenhower's public statement, the Soviet delegation left the Paris Peace Summit just before it began. So we had several countries together to talk about, living with each other in this communist world that's coming about. And because of Eisenhower's statements, the Soviet delegation left the Paris Peace Summit in Geneva just as it was about to start. So relations between the United States and Russia are going to cool considerably. Well, what do you think Premier Khrushchev's philosophy would be concerning the United States at this time, May of 1960? What's coming up in November of 60? An election. And what's going to happen in January of 61? New president. So what, Paris, is Khrushchev's philosophy concerning Eisenhower? What? He doesn't like him. What's he going to do? Just wait him out. He's going to